Good afternoon. Today is the 3rd of February 2010. I'm Darrell Peterson, a volunteer in the Palm Springs Air Museum here in California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of our country's military conflicts, especially World War II. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in those conflicts. Today we have the honor and privilege of interviewing a Major in the Canadian Armed Forces, Tait Hauver, and he was a glider pilot amongst other things in the Canadian military. So we are glad to talk to you today about your experiences, and we'd like to start off by having you spell your full name, give us the date of birth, and where and when you were born.
Okay, well, all my names are surnames. My first name is Tait, T-A-I-T. My second name is Bradley, and my last name is Hauver, H-A-U-V as in Victor, E-R. I was born in Cowansville, Quebec in 1929, the 12th of April, as a matter of fact. I have a twin sister who was born about 30 minutes after I was. I've lived in Cowansville for a number of years. I went to Cowansville High School. I left there in 1949. In the meantime, I was out of school for about a year and a half because I was afflicted with polio. And so I had to learn to walk all over again. That was in 1943. After I left Cowansville High School, I went into the military in October 1949 on active service. And I served with the Royal Canadian School of Artillery in Picton, Ontario. It was there that after I completed my basic and core training that I saw a glider sitting on the field, which the base itself used to be an old bombing and gunnery school. So they had this glider sitting there, and I saw it one day and I thought, well, I'd like to fly one of those. So I applied for the glider pilot's course, and I was accepted. There were 10 of us that went to the School of Aviation Medicine in Toronto. 9 of us got there, and only 3 of us got through. So we were pretty lucky. And so we went out to Rivers about middle of August, and I started my basic flying training under civilian contract in Brandon, Manitoba. We flew Targamas and the Roncachamps. Most of the time was Targamas, and we put in 65 hours of time in those. We had to have 202 hours of ground school and 75 hours of flying time before we could go into the Rivers to the gliders. But we had a lot of fun with that. We did all the aircraft training that we had to do, but night flying, day flying, aerobatics, the whole works. So it was a lot of fun, plus the cross-country flying. After we completed our flying in Brandon, we went back to Rivers, and that's where we started flying the gliders. And these were the CG-4A cargo gliders. They were towed by the DC-3s, and most of the pilots there at the time were actually World War II veterans. They'd completed their training previously. But so I was one of the younger, non-veteran type people that got there, because the other 2 people that were on the course with me were also World War II veterans. And so we had quite a time. It was a lot of fun. It was interesting. And flying the gliders itself was something of an experience that you don't get to do every day. Because when we started off, we first had some preliminary instructions, and then we changed around, and the 3 of us rotated between pilot, co-pilot, and then somebody on the ground, and then back again, and so on. So we had a lot of fun with that. But flying the gliders was something else again. These gliders, as most of you probably don't know, were quite big. They could carry 12 fully equipped men plus a pilot and co-pilot, or else they could call it a jeep, or a small bulldozer, or a field gun, or something like this. And the cargo compartment was fairly large. The wingspan of the glider was about 83 feet 6 inches with a 10-foot cord. Now, I mean a 10-foot cord, that's from front to back, so you had over 830 square feet of wing area. The tail itself was about 12 feet high, and we cruised on tow at about 150, and we glided at about 85 miles an hour. Our tow link was different from some of the ones I've seen here at the museum, in that the tow catch was just below the windshield. The ones you'll see here in the museum, they have the toe up high above the cockpit. Now, the cockpit is interesting because we had the dual control, one set of small instruments, 5 instruments in the front, and our catch hooks, and then we had 3-way trim, the rudder, the elevators, and the ailerons. And these were fastened along the top of the fuselage. The fuselage itself was hinged just behind the pilot and co-pilot seat. And in the bottom on the lower right and left hand side were quick release catches. Well, rather than take chances in having our cockpit come detached during flight, we used to wire those things together because it would have been a bit awkward to sit there with us flying forward and the aircraft going down.
Oh, yeah.
So we did that all right. And during the flying experience, you know, we flew in all kinds of weather, and the interesting part was that if we hit cloud, the only way we could tell whether the tug was turning, and that was the DC-3, we were on probably a 250-foot, 300-foot tow line, was to see if the cord was turning. And if the tow line was turning one way, then we could look at to see which way the tug was going. Otherwise, we didn't know where it was. And quite often, we'd spend maybe an hour and a half in cloud, and so the eye strain was something else again. We'd both be leaning over the control wheels, looking at the tow rope all the time, which was maybe about 3 feet in front of us. It was a lot of fun.
Let's see. Let me interrupt just
Yes.
for a minute. Now, what years?
1940. I went in there in 1950, and I came out in 51.
Okay, so you know, I guess my vision of where they used gliders was primarily for the invasion
That's
of
right.
Europe.
Yeah.
Now, what was the military thinking about continuing to have gliders?
Actually, when I went in, I was in one of the last of the courses for gliders. There was a couple more courses after that because they were going into helicopters.
Okay.
So it was just the tail end. There were
Mhm.
gliders left over from war surplus. They weren't war surplus. They were actually military gliders, but they were still using them in the military along with the paratroopers because we used to.
Were they used in Korea?
I understand that they were, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I'm not sure about that. I can't say, but I know that they were certainly used in Europe during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
But no, we trained because where I was a joint air training center, and they trained the airborne, the paratroopers. They had Army and Navy pilots training out there too, and plus the gliders.
So this was kind of a preparation if
Yeah.
there was any other conflict that, and I guess after the war there was still a lot of worry about what next.
Yeah, yeah. No, they were using helicopters in rivers at the time, but they started.
Pretty limited to like
Yeah.
1 or 2 people.
They had the Sikorskys.
Cargo, yeah.
Yeah, they had some Sikorskys out there, and they were the Air Force got those,
Mm-hmm.
and the Air Force, they flew the Osters, which were the observation aircraft for the artillery. They wouldn't let us touch them, so we didn't let them touch our gliders. It was a
Yeah.
trade-off. They wanted to fly gliders, we said no.
All right.
If we can fly the Oster, you can fly our glider. They wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of fun, but yeah, I stayed there. I put in 25 hours in the glider, and I left Rivers and went back to School of Artillery in Pictou again. I got out of the active force in 52, in the fall of 52. I went back to the reserves, and I stayed there I was with the artillery altogether for 32 years. And I came up through the ranks, starting at, I always said a gunner, rear rank, acting blank file, you know. But and I came out as a major.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was retired because of my age. At the time, the senior ranks originally were retired at 49, but then they lowered the age to 47, and so when I got to be 47, I was automatically retired. I was out about a year, a little over a year, and I was asked to go over to take over an air cadet squadron. So I transferred from supplementary reserve to the cadet instructors list. It was actually part of the reserve force. And I had the air cadet squadron for 7 years, so I ended up with the Air Force.
Okay.
That way, yeah. And I stayed there for a while. And then I was with the Ready Reserve for 5 years after that, and then finally they told me I was way too old to go. I was about
So
65.
how old were you by this time when you reached?
I was about was in the 60s.
Oh my.
Yeah, so I stayed there for quite a while then.
Well, yeah.
So
You like the gliders.
yeah, I still fly. We got our pilot's license when we were in Brandon. It was just a fluke, I guess. The Department of Transport inspector showed up one day, and the chief flying instructor said, "Well, we might as well write for our pilot's license." So we did, and so after I got out of the service, I still continued to fly for a number of years, and I flew the Cessna 150, the 172, and okay, I still bum around and catch flights with friends, but I gave up the license in '72 when my family started to get bigger. It was a choice of flying or having a family.
I recognize that issue.
Yeah.
It's an expensive hobby.
Yeah, well, it was, you know, because when I tell people that when I first started flying the civilian aircraft, I was paying $6 an hour for a Piper Cub. And I told them about that, and they flipped.
They love that.
And then
now.
Gradually it started going up, and it went to $18 and $20, and then, well, it's up to $90 today for an hour. But,
wow.
yeah, but it was an experience. I'm glad that I did it, because it's something that not too many people get a chance to do.
Right, they're unique. I have interviewed one other fellow that was in the U.S. glider Corps in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So I've heard a little bit about it. That it's not as popular as the fighter and the bomber guys.
Well, this is it. You know, this is the problem. One of the things about the gliders that were different from aircraft is we didn't have flaps. We had spoilers on the tops of the wings, and they were aboard maybe about 6 feet long, I think it was, and a few inches wide. And when you wanted to slow down or lose lift, we'd put on the spoilers. But the only thing was, you had to crank on the trim pretty fast, because once you put the spoilers on, to hang on to that control and keep the nose from going down, you were just literally fighting a truck. You know? So you crank on the trim and get it leveled off, and it was okay.
Okay.
But, and the other thing too was when we were taking off, we had to remember once we got in the air, airborne, which was only a few feet after we rolled, the tug was still on the ground, so we had to stay low.
Oh, you
were
were flying before they were.
Oh yeah, very much so. So if once we were in airborne, if we went too high, there was a possibility that the tug couldn't take off because it couldn't get the tail down, and it could have very easily flipped.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a specialized thing.
Yeah. And sometimes they used to practice what we call snatches, where the tugs would come in airborne, and they put the tow rope out beside the glider on a big loop, and the tug would come in and drop its hook, and hook onto the tow rope and take off. So in the glider, in the tow plane itself, there was a cable, and it was on a reel with a brake, and the brakeman would let the cable out and then gradually apply the brake and let it slow down and then reel it back in again.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, one day the brakeman forgot to release the brake, and the tug came in and grabbed the glider, and the pilot seats were basically metal and plywood, two pieces like that. They broke. So you can imagine, here these two guys sitting there.
You were jerked like never before.
It wasn't me, and I'm glad it wasn't too, because they were explaining how they flew afterwards. They were like stretched out like this, trying to fly the glider and stay awake. It was really something.
How about the guy in the tug?
I'm not sure what happened to him. I never did hear.
That was.
Yeah,
that would be like throwing an anchor out. You know.
The one thing that the gliders did have, which we didn't use, they discontinued them, but we used to have an arrestor chute. And before I got to Rivers, one of the gliders were coming in one day, and there were two releases on the ceiling, and one was to release the chute, to deploy the chute itself. The other one was to release the pack. And the co-pilot reached up to release the pack, and he pulled and released the chute when they were still airborne. Well, the glider came down. It hit very hard. The wings literally smashed off. The pilot and co-pilot went right out through the aircraft, and one of the guys that I later flew with, he slid down the runway, and his uniform literally ripped himself, his leg right up through. He was in pretty bad shape for a while. But Yeah, when they were explaining how they picked up the wings, and the crew came out to recover the aircraft and got all around the wings, picked it up, and it was so broken up the pieces came away in their hands.
Mm.
It wasn't much, because it was just plywood,
Yeah.
plywood and fabric. The only part that was metal was around the cage in the aircraft itself.
Mm-hmm.
But we did have a safety factor in the glider, in that just behind the cockpit, fastened onto the cockpit, was an arm about 18 inches long with a cable attached, and this cable went back to the cargo compartment, down in the bottom on two pulleys, and then you would connect any heavy cargo to that, so that when you came in for a landing, if the cargo shifted, it would automatically pull the cockpit up and the cargo would go out underneath.
Oh.
Otherwise, you'd have a couple of squashed people in the glider itself.
Yeah, a lot of risks in that business.
Originally, the first people that were flying the gliders during the Second War, they didn't have too much time. I think I understood they did something like 6 hours of flying, and that was it.
Yeah, probably. They were trying to get a lot of people ready in a short time.
But we went, it was 40 hours for us to qualify.
Mm-hmm. Now, who made, was that Waco that made that?
The Waco gliders,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. At one point, they actually made what they called the CG-4A. It was a power glider. And they had two small engines fastened to the wings, and because the wings were strutted, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And they fastened the engines in there. Now, they towed the aircraft off, but then they would turn on the engines, and they could carry on as long as they had fuel, just like a regular airplane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was all kinds of
I never saw one
ingenious
of those,
kinds of things going on then.
But they talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
We never saw them. We didn't have them.
Now, were those made under license in Canada then?
No, they were from
made in the
I
U.S.?
think Waco,
Okay.
the Waco gliders. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Bigger aircraft than a lot of people realize. You know, we just talk.
Yeah, the
explain
80-foot wingspan.
Yeah.
That's
well, bigger than some of the jets today.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
close to a DC-3. I think the DC-3 is about 100.
There was a DC-3 that was our tow aircraft.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, let's see. I had some other questions here. Now I forget. Oh, were you based at one place, or did you move around?
No, I moved around. I moved around over the years. I started off in Petawawa.
Well, you got to explain to us,
So Petawawa
colonists down here.
was the main, during World War II and afterwards for a number of years, Petawawa was the main artillery and engineering school.
And what was it near?
It was north of Ottawa. It's about 90 miles north of Ottawa.
All right.
It was quite a big base, and I first went there with the reserves. I was only 16 when I joined the reserves, so I went there as a batman, and that's the only way I could get into our local regiment or battery. So I spent 2 weeks there in 1945, and then I stayed on and became a gunner, qualified gunner, and rose to the rank of sergeant. And then in 1949, I went active service and started over again. But I went to Picton, Ontario. That's right on Lake Ontario,
Mm-hmm.
south of Belleville. I was in Rivers, Manitoba, which is just northwest of Brandon. It's about 150 miles west of Winnipeg. I was in Gagetown, New Brunswick. That's near Fredericton. I was in Valcartier several times. I was in that's near Quebec City, just north of Quebec City. Where else? Oh yes, and I was in Camp Borden, which is north of Toronto. So and Kingston, Ontario. That was a school, signal school there. I took a junior NCO's course in that school.
Okay.
But I traveled around different camps.
Yeah. Now the weather in Canada is a bit cold in winter, so
Yes.
What happened in the gliding world
Well,
in the winter?
I'll tell you, some people don't believe this, but if it got too cold, we wouldn't fly. There was no two ways about it. And one day we were checking on the weather, and it was really cold, and they said it was 65 below.
Mm.
So
It was cold.
needless to know. Well, there were times we used to go out and use the Herman Nelsons to get the tug aircraft to start. These were the heaters that
Mm-hmm.
they used. But most of the time, during the time that I flew up there, for the most part, it wasn't too bad. It was quite
But
nice.
there's
weather.
no heat in the glider.
No heat in the gliders. So we had
Lots-
our battle dress, and then we had
Lots
flying
of
suits
clothes
on.
on.
Yeah. But strangely enough, during that year, 49, 50, 51, 52, the weather was reasonably mild otherwise.
Okay.
You know, and so we were quite comfortable. It's not like today. Like when I left Montreal last Sunday to come down here, it was -18, which was Celsius, which would be about 0 degrees Fahrenheit. So we would.
Yeah,
so-
right. Probably lower than that,
Yeah.
actually, wouldn't
It
it?
runs around, yeah, I think about 18 degrees, 18 degrees Celsius. So going from there, coming down here and running into from
Heat wave.
heat wave, yeah, it's quite a change indeed,
Yeah.
yeah. No, during the weather, I remember one day we had a parade outside, and half the guys went to the hospital because of frozen feet.
Frozen. Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't just used to it. But going from Picton, Ontario, which is right on Lake Ontario, I was used to the damp weather. Now, when I got to Rivers, it was very, very dry.
Mm-hmm.
So I was standing the cold much more than most of the other people.
Okay.
And the worst that happened to me at any one time, I went out to check a radio in one of the aircraft one day in preparation for some flying, and I came back in and I'd frozen my fingers
Hmm.
and nose. I could feel that. So I went back out, got some snow put on it, and went back in.
Yeah,
You think now, no,
that's
you're not supposed to do that, but
favorite trick
Yeah.
to thaw is put
Thaw it
snow
out,
on it. Yeah, that's
but
good.
it worked, you know. But it was the base itself, unfortunately, is closed now. They've transferred everything. I don't
Yeah.
know where they've gone. It's
It's,
different places.
Well,
So
it's
it
a
was
bit of history that
Yeah.
you know, now is.
I went to
unique.
Picton this last summer. I left there in '52. I was there back in '53 with the reserves, a couple of times, as a matter of fact. But they closed that down, but the base is still there. So
Mhm.
I had a chance to go back and drive through it and see what it was like. There's a lot of civilian people in there now with construction companies and so on.
Yeah.
You know, but
So tell us a little bit about your early life before you
Well,
got in the military. Where were your parents from, or your grandparents?
Well,
Did they
my-
come
my-
from England, or?
well, we can go back to back to 1000, 1100
Is that right?
AD,
Wow.
because my parents originally were my ancestors, I guess I better put it that way, originally came from the Palatinate in Germany,
Oh.
and they stopped off in England. That's the Hauver family. Now Hauver is Hauver, you name it. It's any derivative of what we have today.
Is
And my mother's parents came from Scotland, the Bradleys. So the Hauvers went to England. They were in England for a short period of time. Then they were invited, strangely enough, from what I understand, by the Mohawk chiefs to come and settle in New York State.
oh.
So they settled in. There were a lot of them were called like Pennsylvania Deutsch, but I think
Mhm.
was just the German Dutch. And they settled there, and then they during the American Revolution, some of them moved back up to
Back
Canada.
to Canada, huh? Okay.
So I've got the Hungerfords, which are on my grandmother's side, one of my grandmother's side. They moved to Canada and came back, and they still live in Vermont. We're only about 10 miles from the Vermont border, so
Mhm.
we get across quite often.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I buy my gas in the States because it's cheaper.
Oh, yeah. How much cheaper?
Well, I paid $2.68 just a week ago for a gallon, and in Quebec the gasoline is $1 a liter, which is so you're
Sounds
looking
like
at about $4 a gallon.
Wow. And
So
we
it's
think
quite
we
a-
got it
We go,
hard.
da-
huh?
yeah, we go down to Enosburg Falls and pick up the mail, get some gas, go to Hannaford's, buy. We got that just before Thanksgiving, we got a turkey down there for 47 cents a pound.
Oh.
So it was good. But my ancestors, yeah, they came from Germany and England, Scotland, and Ireland. My wife's family, they came over from Ireland and settled in different parts of Canada.
Okay. So how about your immediate father and mother? You were born just as the Depression was starting, I guess. Right. And do you have any recollections of how they fared?
Well,
what did they do?
We weren't too bad because my father was, he owned a hotel. My grandfather owned a hotel, so that was
in what city was that?
Cowansville.
And
Cowansville.
And where's that?
In Quebec, yeah.
Okay.
So my mother and father were married in 1919. I had an older brother who was born in he was 8 years older than us.
Oh. And
he served in the Second War. He was with the artillery, and then Service Corps first, artillery, and then he ended up in Europe with the engineers.
Oh.
He was hauling Bailey bridges. But he died a few years ago. And, but my mother was first settled in Ontario, and then eventually they moved to Quebec. Strangely enough, her parents were also hotel keepers, a long line of hotel keepers, so they sort of got together.
So did they mainly do the work themselves, cleaning and?
No.
They had staff?
Oh, they had staff, oh yeah.
Okay. And your mother worked at the hotel?
No,
she worked raising children at home?
Yeah, she looked after children.
Like they used to be.
Yeah, that's right. And Dad built a house, and we lived there, and I was born and brought up in that house.
Mm-hmm. What kind of a school did you go to?
It was called a high school.
But grade school?
Yeah, it went from grade 1 right up the graduation.
So it was a city school. Yeah. How many kids were there?
At that time, probably 500.
So it was a
fairly big
pretty
school.
Big operation.
Yeah, they started off in grade 1 and they went right up through to grade 11. That's when we graduated from grade 11.
11, huh? Yeah. Different than the U.S. where it's 12. Huh?
Yeah.
You were smarter. You could do it faster.
Well, I don't know. They for a couple of years they had what they called grade 12, which was the equivalent of first-year university.
Mm-hmm.
And they used that for a while, but they didn't have it when I graduated.
Okay, well that's interesting. I never knew that was a different. I guess I kind of assumed everybody had 12 grades, but I guess not.
Well, in some of the places in Canada, they go to grade 13. In Ontario, for instance.
Oh.
I don't know what the basic difference is other than time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's now they have what we call the regional school. That was formed in 1969. See, when I got out of the service, I worked for the Bell Telephone for 5 years, and then I went into education. And I took my teacher's training at MacDonald College, which is part of McGill University in Montreal. And then I did my degree nights and weekends through St. George Williams, which is now Concordia in Montreal. I finished there. And so I taught first of all, I went back to Heroes. I taught there for 10 years teaching industrial arts, and then I changed over to social studies and went to Massey Vanier in '69, and I was there for 22 years. So, I've been retired basically 18 years this June. So I find it busier being retired than it was when I was teaching. But yeah. Okay.
So
we have 4 children. The oldest is in her 50s, and then I have another one. One of the girls was here today. She's in her 40s. She is an accountant, and she and her husband have a business in Sackville, New Brunswick. They make Christmas wreaths.
Oh.
And the other daughter that's here with me, her husband is principal of Massey Vanier, and she has 2 children. They both have 2 children. And then I have a son in Toronto who's a contractor. Mm-hmm. He has 2 children. He's quite busy with that job. So We see them all the time.
Okay, well, you got a lot of places to visit.
Yeah, yeah, we do. And I'm always on the telephone. You know.
Don't have to rent a hotel.
Well, they were all down at Christmas time. I have a twin sister, and two of our children are twins. And so the whole family was there at Christmas time. We had 17 in the house for Christmas dinner.
Yes. Getting a little crowded.
It was. Yeah.
Or you got a big house.
Well, we have actually 3 bedrooms. Then we had another den, I call it computer room, down in the basement. We have a big double bed down there. And Tanya, our second oldest, she likes to stay down there. It's nice and quiet.
Yeah.
Gets away from the kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have a big family and get everybody together.
Yeah.
It's
well, especially
getting harder and harder to do as people spread out all directions. You know, getting everybody together is a project.
Well, this is it. You know. Tanya is 600 miles away, and Michael is 350 miles away. So Debbie's just over
still
the next,
within driving distance,
yeah,
but
yeah.
you know, in a day or so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what brings you to the west coast of the U.S.?
Well, this my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, he camps. He lives on Vancouver Island, and he and his wife have a camper, and they come down here every year.
Oh.
So they're stopping off the Emerald Desert Campground.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got the idea one day, well, you know, why not come down, visit for a week?
Okay.
So Debbie got the idea, she's the younger one, and so we started the ball rolling, got the tickets and everything, made the reservations, and picked up a car in Los Angeles and drove out. And so,
So you're here for a couple of weeks?
Just for the week.
Just a week?
Yeah,
Oh,
just a week,
well.
yeah.
Thanks for stopping to see us.
Well, I wanted to see this, and I found it very, very interesting.
Yeah, we think.
Because I like airplanes. I work with a guy over in an airport in what they call Bromont. It's just south of Granby, Quebec. And I go over and work with on the airplanes with him sometime.
Okay.
Then occasionally somebody will say, let's go flying, so away I go.
Okay.
You know?
Well,
Get
that's
up, yeah.
good. Yeah.
Yeah. I've got a friend of mine who likes to fly, and we go down to the Maine coast for a week or so, and go to the local airport and take a flight up.
Yeah. Well, when you were going to school and when you were young, did you have a urge to be with the airplanes? Or,
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, this is something. Yes.
Started early, huh?
When during the war, at the beginning of the war, of course, there was a lot about airplanes, and there was air bases at St. Hubert and St. John's, just not too far away from us, and we were planes going over all the time. So I got the idea that I was going to build a plane one day, and I started out with a piece of board and a stick and a couple of, and I made what I call a rudder bar and the stick. Then I went further and I built the control surfaces. So I had the wings and I had the tail, I had the rudder, elevators, and the whole thing all connected up and working. And we had it up on my father's workbench in the basement.
How big was this?
Pardon?
How big a vehicle was this?
Well, the basement, the work table was probably 30 inches high, so I sit it up on top of that. You see,
Okay.
I had a chair up there and the controls because the basement was fairly high. And then on the rafters, a friend of mine was quite an artist, so he drew in all the different airplanes on the rafters.
Okay.
And we get in this mock-up and go flying around and shooting the airplanes and stuff like that. That's how it started, yeah.
It was the first simulator that we have here at that computer.
yeah, nothing like that, yeah. But I picked up a few car instruments and mounted them on the instrument panel. Those were my instruments.
Okay. So
had a switch there for the switches and so on. And but then in 1946, spring of '46, I actually flew. I went to the local airport, and they had Piper Cubs, surplus Piper Cubs, and that was the first flight that I did. And I actually flew the plane.
Okay.
And, which surprised the instructor all the pieces.
But you had all that simulator experience.
Yeah. And I still have the book today that I got on the Piper Cub. I got that in just after the war, 1946. I still have it.
had all the details of
Oh
the
yeah, how to
controls
fly and
and
yeah, the
everything.
whole works.
Okay.
Yeah, and they had a price list. It was $850 for a Piper Cub and $1250 for the cruiser. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that'll buy you a tank of gas nowadays.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah. But,
Wow. Okay.
no,
So,
I enjoyed flying, and I suppose if it had more money at the time, keep the
did you ever
family.
think about going commercial or?
At one time I did, yes, yeah, because I would have needed only about 30 more hours to go for a
That's
commercial
close,
license.
yeah.
And but there was to fly. I had to. Most of my flying I did in Chatham, Ontario, because that was one of the places where there was an airport nearby. And then finally they had one in St. John's, about 30 miles away, so I flew out of there a few times.
Mm-hmm.
I had the Cessna 150 that I flew out of there. And then they had an airport near our place, near Collinsville for a while, and they had Cessna 172, so I used to go up there and fly out of there a bit with friends.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
So any adventures, close calls that you like to
Yes.
recall?
On one of my flight tests, the guy put me into a spin. I whacked my head on the canopy, and I couldn't get oriented.
Oh.
He had to pull it out.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah, that was about the worst one, I guess.
mm,
But I liked flying. I liked the basic because I liked doing aerobatics.
oh,
It was a lot of fun. I used
yeah.
to do the loop and so on. I watch the different colors change. You know. I enjoyed that. I used to loop just for the fun of it, just to see the changing colors.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So, where did you meet your wife in all these
Well,
travels?
I met my wife on a blind date.
Oh.
A friend of mine, and we were sitting around one night talking, and a guy by the name of Jimmy Kramer, and he said, well, you know, if you want to go to a place called Knowlton, which was 12 miles away, and go up and see Joan Taylor. So I said, okay, sure. So we got the car and went up there. And while I was there, Joan said, how would you like to meet a nice girl? I said, sure. So she phoned Phyllis and had her come over, and that's how I met her.
Okay.
The 22nd of April, 1949.
Okay,
Yeah.
that was
And we
about
were
the time you got into the
just before I
military.
went into the military.
Yeah.
And we were engaged in 1950, and then married in 53. So it's been married 56 years coming up.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. That's,
Yeah.
Congratulations.
yeah.
Made the right choice.
Yes, I did. I did indeed, yes. Yeah.
Good.
We've had 4 kids, and they were fantastic.
Great.
Yep.
That's always nice to
Yes.
have a loving family and.
Oh, and we keep in contact all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Michael gets uptight sometime. He phones, and we listen to him, and he feels better afterwards. You know, contracting is busy. You know, sometimes it's a real hair raiser.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially trying to please the customers. You know, and it's not always that easy. We think it is, but when we hear from him and know what goes on, and so he makes that all right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Now do you get a pension from the Canadian military?
No, when I got out of active service, they sent me my stoppages. So I invested those, but I get a pension from education, so
Mm, okay.
I'm all right, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how the U.S. and Canada compare in
Yeah. I understand that in the U.S., people even in the reserves get a pension or something.
yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
was thinking. I was
They have-
wondering if you had the same.
No, they haven't gotten that far yet.
No.
I wish they had, but.
So, but the people that stay in full time, they get a
They get pensions,
pension.
yeah. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they 25 years. Yeah, the pensions. A lot of them stay in. They put in their 25 years or so, and then they go out and they go to work for something else. 'Cause
Mhm.
they're still young enough to do it.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Okay, well, I think that
Mhm.
pretty well covers the questions that I have. Your experiences are unique to me because of being in Canada rather than the U.S.
Yeah.
and
Well, we have temperature.
different environment up
Oh
there.
yeah, it's different. But we have hot weather in the summer too, though.
Yeah.
Very hot weather, yeah.
Yeah,
We complained about that. Then we complained about the cold, but what the heck?
yeah.
I was talking to one guy yesterday over at the campground. And he wanted to know how I could stand the cold. I said, well, you get used to it after a while. So I put on a heavy shirt and heavy jacket, and that's it. He said, well, do you run around with your face all covered up? I said, no, it's not that bad most of the time.
Yeah, well, if the wind's blowing, you can freeze your face
We had
in a hurry.
we had a wind chill of minus 33 last week, so nobody went too far that way.
Yeah.
Stayed that way.
Yeah. I was brought up in South Dakota, so
yes.
I know about cold weather.
Yes, yeah.
Not quite as cold as Canada, probably.
Well, it's the same temperature, between the Dakotas, especially the prairies.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop at the border.
Right, that's true. All those
Yeah.
big fronts come down
Oh,
and
yes.
cover the same area.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Madonna, thank you
Oh,
for
you're very welcome.
participating in our program here, and I guess the Canadian government is appreciative of your
Well, I'm not sure. When they sent me a
service.
letter, they said, told me that my services are no longer required.
well,
Yeah.
young guys are coming up.
Oh, yeah.
You gotta make
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, well, that's true enough. Although they were sorry afterwards that they made that change, I'll tell you, because a lot of senior officers were taken out of the military.
Hmm.
It cost the government quite a bit in experience,
Yeah.
lost
Well,
experience. That was
yeah.
it, yeah. Oh well. That's the way
Okay,
it goes.
well, thank you.
Well, thank you very much.